Welcome to Without Regret, the podcast where we explore the transformative power of storytelling and resilience. I'm your host, Tamara Albrecht, and I'm thrilled to introduce our special guest for today's episode, Jaz Rollensen. Jaz is not only an award-winning book coach, resilience speaker, and best-selling author, but she's also a passionate advocate for using stories to create positive change in the world. With a background in creative writing and psychology, Jaz has a unique ability to empower individuals to turn their personal experiences into impactful narratives that resonate with others. Throughout our conversation, Jaz will share her experience with an abusive father, her jagged path to healing, insights on the power of storytelling, and how writing your story is an essential tool for resilience, self-care, and well-being. Drawing from her own experiences as a survivor and advocate, Jaz will inspire you to break through adversity and live with purpose. From appearing on primetime TV programs to connecting with communities around the globe, Jaz has touched the lives of countless individuals with her message of hope and healing. Join us as we delve into the art of storytelling and discover how each of us has the power to inspire, impact, and change lives. Well, it's nice to meet you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You too. Thank you.
So you are a book coach, but also a domestic violence advocate, correct?
Yes.
And that's because of personal experience for you?
Yes, that's right.
So you want to just tell me a little bit about your domestic violence situation? What was going on there?
Yeah, so I grew up in a home with domestic violence, family violence with a perpetrator of DV, which happened to be my father. And I guess just to summarize that situation, it was a really difficult. It's really difficult when you are so young and also growing up pre-social media, pre-advocacy kind of times. Couldn't go on Instagram and find out what coercive control was or anything like that. So I really didn't have words for what my experience was for a very long time. I just knew that I had a dad who was very volatile. I never knew what kind of mood he was going to be in when I got home, and I never knew when he was going to explode. And although his abuse was mostly mental, emotional, verbal, financial, it was very occasionally physical. So there was that, but I didn't tend to see it. And so that's why I didn't have words for what was going on. I was like, is this even abuse? Like, I really don't know what this is. And so that continued for a long time. And I would say teachers, friends didn't know what was going on. We really just kept it under wraps in our home. And, that led, like many young women, that led to, very severe depression, anxiety, suicidality. And then when I was 18 and I finished school and I was sort of trying to think about how I was going to get out of home and, how I was ever going to get out of this situation, my dad actually took his life.
Oh, wow.
So that was another layer of trauma on top of almost 10 years of trauma. And, to cut a very long story short, I went out into the world as a very emotionally damaged young woman, made a lot of decisions from trauma, a lot of risky decisions, unhealthy decisions, which led to more trauma. And then I had my rock bottom moment when I was just before my 21st birthday. So that's kind of, the summary of where I came from. And when I speak at events or when I do keynotes, I say I certainly didn't get to where I am today, overnight. It was a very long journey, but that's kind of the snapshot of what I grew up in and what those kind of experiences prepared me for.
Right. I saw on your website one of your speaking events at a school to young children. That's my dream, is to be able to speak to teenagers, young children, and just kind of, let them know just whatever you can that might sink in that, they don't have to, they're not defined by their circumstances, and
Absolutely.
And I think, like you said, with social media and things like that, now it is a little bit easier to get maybe some support. But, with controlling parents, that maybe that's not an option either for some kids even now. So So you said you hit your rock bottom moment right before 21. Is that when what was that moment, if you don't mind sharing? And was that when you really started making changes? Was it an immediate thing? Was it gradual? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, that rock bottom moment was, yeah, so it was after about 2 years on from Dad's death. And as I said, I went out into the world making a lot of unhealthy decisions. And as part of that, I was gravitating to a lot of very unhealthy relationships. And one of those relationships was with a guy that I'd known for about 18 months. And the rock bottom came when when he made a decision to sexually assault me. And I think the language, the reason I want to change my language there is that often as survivors, we say, I went through this, I experienced this, but really what was so traumatic about it was that I had known him for a long time. And I thought he was a safe person. I thought he was someone that respected my boundaries, knew what I was and wasn't okay with. But he made a decision on that particular night that he was going to sexually assault me, and that's what happened. And there were certainly red flags before then, although I would say I wasn't aware of some of them. And the ones that I was aware of, I kind of just kept pushing away because I wanted to believe that he was the good person that I could see I wanted to believe that the good parts of him that I saw were who he really was. And so, like many, victim survivors, I ignored all of the warning signs, and part of that was because of my history as well with a father who was a domestic violence abuser. I wasn't aware of what domestic violence was other than physical abuse. So with this relationship, I didn't know what gaslighting was. I didn't understand when he would literally say to me, that didn't happen, or that's not what I did. I didn't know what coercive control was. I didn't understand patterns of repeated intimidation or behavior. And so I just thought, oh, he's a bit of a jerk. He really needs to mature in certain ways. And so that's why it took so long for me to understand. But it was when I had that experience happen, I sort of went, yeah, something has to change. And it's my it's my choices that need to change.
That's all you can control. That's all you can change. Right?
Because I wasn't
them.
I wasn't responsible for what he had done. It wasn't my fault. But
Correct.
I was responsible for the situations that I kept putting myself in, or the chances that I kept giving. And so, like you said, I had to get to that point where I went, well, I never want this to happen again. And I know it's only going to get worse from here if I continue down this path I've been on. So I need to make some changes. And so that certainly wasn't an overnight thing, to sort of answer that part of your question. It took a long time, but some of the things I did in the beginning were being aware of the types of people I was hanging out with. And were they people, whether this was a friend or whether it was, someone I was dating, did they keep their promises, or were they like the person I'd been with, where they would tell me I could trust them? They'd tell me that they'd never hurt me, but the behavior didn't match up with what they were saying. So that was one of the biggest things I had to do. And then from there, starting to do baby steps towards boundaries. And again, I didn't have anyone to teach me this. I didn't know what boundaries were, but that kind of looked like, when I did start dating, speaking up about something that made me uncomfortable. And that doesn't always have to be, people often think, oh, it's probably something in an intimate situation, but it's not always that. It can be as simple as saying, oh, I didn't like it when you joked around and called me a loser. I know you're only joking, but it reminds me of the way my dad used to talk to me. Or I didn't like it when, you said this, or I'm uncomfortable with this. And those are really difficult for, I find that a lot of women really struggle with boundaries. And then again, a lot of women with a history of trauma. So they were things I had to teach myself step by step. And as I began to implement that, I would get a little bit more courage each time when that was, those boundaries were respected and appreciated. And I was able to go, okay, I feel comfortable to set more boundaries now. And it's just that baby step process. But it's very hard, I would say, in a pre-social media world. And I am glad that at least kids today, if they are in unhealthy, abusive homes, at least hopefully with, Instagram or TikTok and things like that. I mean, I know there can be a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding about what things are, but at least they do have access to learn about, what narcissistic abuse is, what coercive control is, rather than just not having a language for any of this stuff, which was the situation that
right. The
that
language and the just knowing that they're not alone out there too, I think can be really helpful for them too. So you talk about the setting the boundaries and setting them is one thing, communicating them is another, right? And you're right. I think a lot of women especially struggle with that because, we want it. We're typically people pleasers. We want to make people happy. We don't want to be the one. We don't want to be seen as, a negative person, or, there is lots of fear around that. And did you have an experience, for example, where you set a boundary and it kind of didn't go well, and how did you handle that?
I think in many ways I was really lucky because the first proper kind of relationship I went into was only a couple of months after that sexual assault, and he was, just a godsend. He was a beautiful human, and we were together for 3.5 years. So I never really had any situations with him where a boundary wasn't respected. But I do remember early on in that relationship, we were having some drinks at a friend's house, and I would often stay over there on weekends because I lived, quite a long way out of town. And he was staying over with me. And I remember, I had lots of, there were lots of things I was just not comfortable with, not ready for after what I'd experienced. And he was very respectful of that. But I remember we just went into the spare room to lie down and go to sleep. And I think he just went to put his arm around me and kiss me. And it was like a wall went up with me. And I turned my back to him and I was like kind of edging away. And he was like, what's going on? Like, what's wrong? And he was kind of, I would say, like a bit offended at first because he didn't understand what was happening. He just thought, oh, she's really giving me the cold shoulder. And I had to say to him, look, I know like you would never hurt me, but like the last time that I had drinks and then, kissed someone, this happened. So when I've been drinking, I'm now scared that like any comfort, any, smallest of intimacy, like I'm worried that like that will be used against me and like I will be hurt again. And that was really hard for me to say because even though we've been dating a few months and I was pretty sure that he was a, really respectful, solid guy, I still had that fear. And so I was afraid to tell him that. Firstly, I didn't want to, hurt his feelings or make him feel disrespected. And it was really hard to say that. And he was at first, I think, he was a little bit like, I would never hurt you. Like, do you think I would do that? But then, his ego came down and he was like, I'm so sorry. Like, and, nothing's going to happen. We don't have to do anything. And, just want you to know that you're safe, which was really, really huge for me. And that was part of that, as I said, those little baby steps and getting some courage along the way and being respected and then learning again. But I was pretty lucky with him. But after that relationship, and there are a couple of kind of short-term, dating experiences I had before I met my husband. And, there was one of those where my boundaries weren't respected and the person just basically didn't listen at all. And I think this is important to talk about because even though I'd come so far in my healing and being able to stand up for myself in that moment, I found myself back in that, 20-year-old version of myself where I just went into freeze mode, really. I just sort of was like, I can't, there's nothing more I can say. He's not listening. And I just froze. And again, back then, I didn't know what the freeze response was. So I just thought, why did I just kind of go along with this when I really didn't want to? And that's really important for a lot of survivors to understand too, is that many people talk about the flight response and the fight response, but they don't talk about freezing, or they don't talk about fawning, which are more those responses of the nervous system where you either completely freeze or you do kind of go along with it because your nervous system's it thinks you're going to die. So to be honest, so it's trying to keep you safe. So yeah, that's an example of, even though I'd come so far, I still found myself back in that situation of like kind of freeze response, not wanting to rock the boat, just go along with it and get out of here was kind of my body's response. So it's the journey when you're a survivor is not always, up, 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 up. It's not always linear. It's not always linear. You do go backwards sometimes. And I think that can be really validating to hear as well. Obviously, it's important to get the right support, whether that is psychological support, whatever it is, so that you do understand the way that your body responds. You do understand what is appropriate and not appropriate, or healthy or not healthy in relationships, but to give yourself grace for when you can't find the words, or you don't have you're struggling to stand up for yourself in that moment, as I sort of was.
Right. As you're talking, I'm wondering, have you had any sort of therapy at this point? I mean, you seem to know a lot about the nervous system, or have you just done your own research and educated yourself with that research?
I definitely didn't do any kind of therapy when I was younger, really. I had some short-term sort of family counseling when my dad was still alive, but that, as you can probably imagine, didn't go well with him in the room. I did see a psychologist a handful of times when I was probably about 24, but that didn't really go anywhere. And I never really had positive experiences with talking to anyone. So then I had to make a decision. Well, I made a decision when I was about 30. I was married, but that was when I basically had a PTSD breakdown 10 years on from my assault. I thought everything was fine. I was married, doing really well, and then had this PTSD breakdown. Or I usually say PTS because I don't personally believe PTS is a disorder. I believe it's a very natural response to traumatic events. But I made a decision in that moment to save my marriage and help myself out and try again with finding the right support system. So I did go and see a therapist, and I probably saw her, I don't know, 5 to 7 times or something like that, which was all I personally needed. And I was good after that. I was able to get through those symptoms and continue on. And I haven't seen anyone for therapy since then. So that was 8 years ago. And everyone's different, but for me, therapy hasn't been a big or a regular part of my life, but I have done a lot of research about the nervous system, and I work with a great EFT tapping specialist who's trauma informed and helps me out when I'm, really struggling with anxiety or struggling with trauma responses. And for me personally, I can only talk about what's been helpful for me, but I have found that EFT tapping has been more effective for me than, say, talk therapy. But everyone is different. So I always recommend that everybody just does what, most important thing is to find out what is most helpful for you, what you respond best to, and pick that thing and go and do it. And it may be a longer term thing or it may be a shorter term thing, but it's important to keep reaching out until you find the right person to support you, because it is very rare actually to find the perfect person first up. And that's why I guess stayed away from therapy when I was younger for so long, because of negative experiences.
Yeah, I think a lot of people struggle with that. I know. in Australia? Is that where you live? So it looks like it's morning there.
Yes. Yeah, it is. Yeah, just before midday here. Yeah.
Okay. It is almost 6:30 p.m. here.
Yes, that
Um,
sounds about right.
so what is the health system like there?
From what I've heard, I think it's a lot better than what's in America. And to say that in terms of the support is easier to get and potentially more affordable. Although at the moment, with this cost of living crisis we're in and a shortage of actual therapists, it's very difficult. It's not easy to get support here. Wait lists are insane. Like I've had people tell me that they were recommended by their doctor to get urgent mental health care, and they've reached out to therapists' offices and been told, oh, okay, we can see you in 12 weeks. We can see you in 16 weeks. And it's not good. I would say that the system here is not good, but I'm grateful for what we have, because I've heard that it's a lot worse in America. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I know, especially with, I guess I hear a lot that, in America, it's really hard to get healthcare. And would that be an accurate statement to make?
It is
Or very
expensive.
expensive.
It's expensive, and if you don't have a job that provides it as an option, then yes, it is more difficult. I know we do have a healthcare. There's a national website that you can go on, I guess, and get healthcare. But if you're older or have a condition pre-existing, it can be pretty expensive.
Yeah. See, that's what I hear, is that a lot of people, if they can't get it through their workplace, then they feel like they're pretty much screwed. Whereas in Australia, we can, like, a lot of stuff can be bulk billed, or like the psychologist I saw, she did charge, but there was a period of time, because I was only working a contract job at that time, and she was like, if you're struggling, we can actually bulk bill this for you, so you don't have to pay it all. So there was that option, which was so helpful. Whereas, what I hear is that it's not that simple in America, and it's very expensive. And here we can either get it bulk billed, or we can get it subsidized through our Medicare system. And it's a lot easier than some places in the world. But at the same time, people are being failed every single day. Some of them are showing up to hospital because they can't get support they can't get in anywhere. And then even those who do show up to hospital, I hear many people tell me about the horrendous experiences they have trying to get the right support, or trying to get the right medication, or not being treated with dignity and care. And it's a problem everywhere.
I have somebody very close to me who is in a mental health crisis and she's able to get support through the state because she doesn't have insurance, but she had to wait 2 months for an appointment. I mean, she was literally like, it was dire. Let me just put it that way. It was dire. And she still had to wait months to get an appointment. And then they immediately diagnosed her on the first visit and said, you need to go see a psychiatrist and get on medication. And then she had to wait another month to be able to see the psychiatrist. And then she's getting her medications paid for, but it's not good. It's not good help, and then she had to wait again to go back to the original therapist to do the talk therapy. And I don't even know if that's happening. And she's, thank goodness, trying, she's at least not giving up. I can just see, I would probably give up, to be honest. I would just be like, oh, this is too much work. And when you're already suffering in a mental health crisis situation, the stress and the anxiety that gets added onto it, just trying to get help, just as I'm going down a negative path here. I should not be going down. The point is,
I understand what you're saying, though.
Yeah,
it's too many people do give up.
Yeah. A lot of people give up. It's because it's very, very difficult. I'm kind of on a mission right now, though, to do something about that. I have no idea what that looks like, what that is, but even for me with insurance, I've gone to counseling before and seen therapists before. And you're right, it's very hard to find one that you click with, that you like, that you agree with. You mentioned the EFT. I didn't even know EFT was a thing, what that was, until I did a podcast with a woman who just swears by it, just absolutely just, really, really found a lot of benefit from it. But I had no idea that even existed. So that's another kind of point of this podcast, really, is to say there are a lot of people out there who have endured very significant things in their life and have overcome. And this is what worked for them, because you're right. Not everything doesn't work for everyone. And I just want people to understand that they can overcome. And there's many, many, many different ways to do that. And many different ways what that looks like for different people. So that's kind of the point here. So
yeah, absolutely.
And I love, the story of what you endured. We don't need to know details, right? So I love that you share the way you very briefly explained it, where, I think we kind of get the idea of what you went through.
It's an interesting thing too, like for any survivors that are listening that do want to start speaking out about their story or advocating, is that in the beginning, I think, well, for a lot of us, there's obviously fear around sharing our story, because we might be afraid that it's not going to be, especially podcasts. I was doing a workshop last week for some clients and some people in my audience about how to set boundaries with the media and how to set boundaries in podcasts. And I was saying, sometimes people are afraid to share their story because they're afraid it won't be well received, or maybe they'll go on a podcast and they'll be asked to share like really graphic details. And the same thing with the media too. And I think a lot of advocates aren't, they don't know where to start when they start their story. And I know when I began, which was going on 7 years ago, with the advocacy part of my journey, I did feel like I had to share a lot of detail. And I was never sensationalist about it, but I felt like it was expected to go into a lot of detail about all the things that I went through. And over time, along with obviously the vicarious trauma part of that, of listening to a lot of people's stories through the work I do as a book coach, and then having to go into a lot of detail about my story as well, I realized, well, first of all, that's weighing very heavily on me. Second of all, yes, people say that it's really inspiring to hear my story, but they can still be inspired without hearing all of that detail and without having to sort of put a lot of heaviness onto them as well. So, for anyone listening, if you are thinking about sharing a story, just know that you don't have to share all the gory details, and you can hold things back. And the stories that I didn't share until my 4th book, that came out last year. There are lots of things that I just sat on until I was ready to share them. But yeah, I try to sort of give an overview of it these days without having to, give all of the details. Yeah. And that's also good for people that want to listen in, but maybe they are, certain conversations are more triggering for them.
Yes, absolutely.
Can still pass on this knowledge and pass on stuff that's helpful without having to, weigh them down with too much of the detail.
Absolutely. The inspiring part is not what happened. The inspiring part is how you got to where you are today. What did you do to overcome that trauma? The trauma itself is irrelevant. Really, I mean, not to, downplay what anybody went through, but at the end of the day, it's the inspiring part is what you did after the trauma and it's where you are today.
Yeah, it's a balancing act, because especially for people that want to share a book, I always share, you do need to be vulnerable. You do need to share these stories. You can't just say, oh, I got to this, rock bottom moment, but then I just turn my life around, because your audience is not going to connect with that. People are not going to read the book and go, wow, this is like, I really feel for this character, who's a real person. But people really want to connect with the character, if you call it that, of the book. So you do need to give detail and you do need to be genuine and vulnerable, but there is a balance. You know, you don't have to be sensational, don't have to be super graphic, but you got to balance the vulnerability with the insight. Like, you got to give people the tools. That's the most important part.
Right. How did you become a book coach?
I guess just the culmination of all my life experiences. You know, I went to university and I studied psychology and creative writing. I didn't know what I wanted to do with that, but over the years of working as a magazine editor and a freelance journalist, and then writing my first book, I found that, you know, people wanted to share their stories too, and they were always asking me, like, how do you do this? And I really wish I had an opportunity to share my story, or I really wish I could write a book. But a lot of people, they don't have the tools to do that. They don't know where to start. And so in the beginning, I created this series, which is called Reasons to Live, One More Day Every Day. And that is a short anthology series of 10 stories in each book. There's 3 books in the Reasons to Live series. And each story has a, you know, story from someone around the globe who's sharing how they got through their, you know, toughest or darkest moment, and, you know, what helped them, what didn't help them. And the very first book that I created was just an experiment, because I wanted to put something out into the world that would hopefully stop other families from going through what I had with my dad suiciding, and would help people to understand that wherever they were in their journey when they were younger is not where they have to stay. But that book was kind of this catalyst for all these people saying, oh, I'd love to share my story. I wish I could get it out into the world. Would you ever do another book in the Reasons to Live series? And so then it did become a series. And I worked with, you know, over 30 writers to help them write and publish their stories and you know, get their stories out into the media. And then from there, I started coaching people privately to actually write their own books. So it was kind of just this natural progression, I guess, of combining advocacy with my professional, you know, career, that led to people going, wow, I'd really love to do this too. And that's, you know, just where it's come. And then I tend to do more speaking and, you know, public speaking and workshops these days, but still work with, you know, small number of people privately to help them write their books. And I just think it's something that everyone should do. You know, not everyone has to publish their book, but I think everybody should write their story in some capacity, even if you just do it in 5,000 words to start with, or 10,000 words. Write it for yourself, because when you write your story down, you actually get to see on paper, you know, or on screen, exactly how far you've come. And a lot of people never make these kinds of connections or have these transformations until they do that, because they're still living in their head with the narrative of, I'm a survivor of this, or I'm a victim of this, and this happened to me, and this was done to me, and I struggle, and I have this, and I am this and that. And it's not until they write their story, or, you know, or until I ghostwrite it for them, that they go, wow, I didn't realize that I'm not still in that place. I didn't realize that I've come like so much further than I realized. And that's the really healing and transformative part of storytelling that I really love, and that a lot of people don't understand. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I also do writing workshops these days for domestic violence organizations, for their clients and for their staff as well, so that they can have a way of getting their stories out of them and out into the world, even if it is just for themselves at this point in time.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people that I've interviewed for my podcast that have written books, memoirs, that say how therapeutic it is to write it, but also very difficult. Sometimes it takes 4 years to
it can be very triggering at the same time. And you've got to be so careful about how you do it.
Right.
And I mean, that's why it is really good to work with a book coach if you can, or to, you know, if you can, to get someone to ghostwrite your book. But I mean, it's the benefits far outweigh the negatives, as long as you look after yourself and make sure you have support. But yeah,
and
definitely
take those breaks when you need them, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Where do you think your strength comes from?
That's a good question. I think when I was younger, or even up until recent years, I just had this belief that I was just like naturally a very resilient person and a very strong person. But I've come to realize recently that that's a bit of a myth around resilience, because we can't actually build or develop resilience until we're safe first. And this is a really important one for kids too, because people will often say, "Oh, she'll be all right. He'll be fine." You know,
Kids are
he's a
resilient.
kid. They're like, "Oh, she's a kid. She'll be fine." Or, he's a kid. He'll get through this. Our kids are resilient, and it's not actually true, because we are not able to develop or build resilience until we are safe and our nervous systems are regulated. Otherwise, we're just operating out of survival mode. And so for me, I don't know that I don't know how much I'd say that I was very strong as a young person. I think more so I was just surviving, really. But the strength came from knowing that I couldn't, as much as I wanted to take myself out of this world at times when I was younger, I just couldn't do that to my mother. I just personally, I was like, I can't do that to her. And then especially after my dad died too, I was like, I can't do that to her. She's already lost, her husband and our father in that way. So I can't do that to her. So there was a strength that was kind of like I'm deciding there's no other choice. I just have to keep going. But a lot of it for a long time was just survival, until I could get to a place where I could feel safe and my nervous system was regulated. And so now I would say my strength comes from knowing that everything I've been through already has worked out in some way. And generally, anything I go through works out. So far, 100% of the time it's worked out. So I know that whatever I'm going through, it's probably going to be fine. It maybe doesn't feel like it right now, but I can keep going, and I know I can get through this because it's going to be okay. But yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think it's good for people to think about that. I mean, I'm a Christian, and I'd say a lot of people within faith-based communities will say, like, my strength comes from God. For me personally, I don't know if it's that. There've definitely been times where my strength has come from God, but I think mostly it's just that knowing that everything has worked out 100% of the time so far. So it's probably going to be okay this time.
Yeah, I love that answer, actually. I've never gotten that one before. I always ask all my guests that question. And that is definitely a unique answer. And so far, my favorite.
Oh,
Because
I'm glad.
yeah, no, because it's so true. And I've seen that before, in quotes online or whatever, that you've made it through 100% of I've kind of seen that quote out there before, but to think about getting strength from that is really profound. I love that answer. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad I could say something that was a bit different this time.
Yeah, usually, like, for me, I like to think that my strength comes from my mother, and seeing how she handled the adversity in her life. And so typically, yeah, and God, I get that a lot from people as well. So that was a very, I know I put you on the spot. I like to put people on the spot with that question, though.
No, it's good. It's good. I
Yeah.
think the God thing is always interesting too. I say to people, like, a lot of people do get their strength from God, and that's great. But I also think sometimes that I guess because it's a bit of a, I don't know whether to say cliche, but because it's something that we kind of get told to say, or we get taught that that's where our strength comes from.
Right.
Sometimes that can take away from the work that we've actually done.
Very true.
Like, I hear that a lot within Christian communities, where they'll be like, God got me through this. And I'm like, maybe, but you actually got yourself through that.
Right.
And I think it's important to go, yes, my faith is central to, like, it's a big part of who I am. my faith that God will always protect me and get me through everything, gets me through. But you still have to do the work. Like God wasn't like picking me up out of that rock bottom situation and going, all right, I'm going to take you far away from this person and everything's going to be perfect now. I still had to do the work to learn how to set boundaries and all those things.
Right.
So I think it's really important to understand that, like, you can have your faith and belief that God will get you through, but you still need to
give yourself credit.
Give yourself credit. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very good point. So, what is so you're doing the advocacy, you're doing the speaking, obviously all of that is in Australia. You're writing books. What do you want people to know? What is your goal for coming on here?
Well, I was going to say, I actually work with a lot of American clients, surprisingly. Like I've actually I think this year I've been doing more stuff, interestingly, in Australia, but generally I work more in America, which has been really interesting. And I think part of that is, like, here in Australia, we have the tall poppy syndrome, where, if you're not familiar with that term or that phrase, a lot of Australians, they don't like it when another Australian is doing well. Like, there's a lot of jealousy, a lot of envy. So it's called the tall poppy syndrome because they see someone else doing well or thriving, and so they want to tear them down. So there's not always a lot of support. We can really struggle here in Australia to get support for ourselves, especially around advocacy kind of things or business, like as a woman in business. Whereas I see in America, I think because of this, I guess because of the ethos or belief that you guys often have, that, like the whole American dream thing. What I see from an outsider perspective is that a lot of Americans are like, well, if I believe that I can achieve this, I can go and do it. Whereas in Australia, like, a lot of Australians, not all of them, but a lot of them, especially women, are too afraid to try because they don't want to fail. And they're like, I'm going to write a book and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. But in my experience again, and a lot of people in the Australian business community will say this too, they're less likely to take risks sometimes than what I've seen with Americans, which is just really interesting. But yeah, I mean, as I said, I'm doing more speaking for the year ahead. I mean, one of the things that I'm really passionate about is getting into more schools. So if anyone's listening to this podcast and they're like, I would love Jaz to speak at my school, whether it's in America or Australia, I would love to have that conversation. So, you can send me an email or connect at jazrollensen.com/speaking if you'd like me to speak at your event or you'd like me to speak at your child's school. And then, as I said, I still do private book coaching for a small number of women. So I really work with those really mission-driven women who want to create movements of change, who want to advocate on something. There's plenty of book coaches out there who do the whole, I'll help you write a book for your business and that kind of thing. And that's great, but that's not me. I work with women or men who really want to be advocates of change, and they have a really strong vision for how their story in this book is going to create that legacy or going to create that change or that movement. So, if anybody's listening that does really resonate with that, you see yourself as a change maker or a trailblazer who wants to be an advocate and really create global change, then yeah, you can reach out to me. I'm sure the links will be in the show notes, and love to hear your story and help you bring that story to the world as well.
That's beautiful. I think I kind of have an idea. I didn't know that a book coach was a thing until I met up with one of the lovely women that I had on my podcast. She wrote a book, and she just adored her book coach. She's like, I could not have done this without her. But what exactly does a book coach do? And how is it different from an editor?
So an editor is going to polish up your book when it's finished. They're going to go through it and make sure it reads really well, it flows really well. But a book coach is there to help you from the beginning or with the book that's in progress. And it's really like any other coach. I mean, it's interesting. So many people say, oh, I didn't know book coaches existed.
Mm-hmm.
But everyone's heard of a business coach or a life coach or a mindset coach. So it's the same thing. You know, we need accountability and support in our life if we're going to, any time we want to achieve something. If you really want to get your fitness in check, you know that you're going to do a lot better if you have a, PT than if you're relying on yourself to get yourself to the gym. It's probably not going to happen. Every time something comes up, you're going to go, oh yeah, I'll do that later. And then the later often never happens.
Mm-hmm.
So I hear from so many people that say, I'm writing a book, or I want to write a book. And, I might check in 5 years down the track and just sort of have a look on their page, see if they've written a book. In 99% of the time, they haven't. And it's just simply because we're less likely to prioritize something if we don't have accountability. So if you really want to get your book done, it's so important for you to have accountability. And if you don't have the financial capacity to work with a book coach, that can be, finding someone who is a writing buddy for you or an accountability buddy. It could be someone in your business community, it could be a friend. But the accountability piece is really important. And so a lot of people, if they are serious about writing a book and also publishing it, they will go ahead and hire a book coach. And with my clients, I don't just help them with writing the manuscript. I also refer them to my publisher, or I help them make a plan for, pitching their book. One of my clients, she really wanted to get traditionally published, and she did. It was really exciting. But, we worked together on her manuscript because she was, I think, 20,000 words in and got stuck, didn't know where to go from there. And we worked together. We only actually did 2 sessions together. Her name's Amy Nielsen. And that was what she needed to get the next, I think it was 20,000 words written, or the next 40,000 words written. And then she went ahead and pitched her book and ended up getting a traditional publishing deal, which was just, so excited for her. But anybody who has been, who is a successful author has had support in some way, like whether that was just the editing side of it, or whether they, got support to know how to publish it successfully so it doesn't end up as a DIY disaster. But, you really need to work with someone who knows what they're doing. You can try and fudge it, but you're likely to end up with a book that either doesn't sell well, doesn't have has a really bad cover and nobody picks it up, or could just be written a lot more, strongly. So yeah, book coaches are just like business coaches in the sense that they're going to help you achieve what you want to achieve. It's just about finding the right one that suits you. And like I said, some people want to write a book that is how-to kind of book that helps them, with their business. And some people want to write a memoir, and I tend to specialize more in the personal development and memoir side of things. So, yeah.
That sounds pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, to hear other people's stories and just see what their life story is, but more importantly, like we were talking about earlier, what do they want to do with that? Like, what's the change they want to create?
Right.
Because everybody's got a story that can be interesting or helpful, but if it's not providing a solution, then it's not going to have the impact that they want it to have.
Mm-hmm. Right. I've decided I would like to write a book, but I haven't even started yet, but I might reach out.
Yeah, well, please do. If you want help at some stage, more than welcome to reach out.
I'm sure I will. Just from what I've learned, from other people about book coaches, I think that would definitely be something that I would benefit from. So
yeah, well, I recommend it to everyone, even if they just do like 2 sessions. Like I said, with that client I had that got the publishing deal, we only did 2 sessions together, but that was exactly what she needed. And then other clients,
obviously her first ever book.
I think she had written another one before that, actually. Okay. But yeah, most people I work with, it is their first book, and some I work with for 16 weeks. I do a 16-week program to get clients to their first 20,000 words. And then most of them continue working with me for another couple of months just to finish the manuscript. But, I've got a client that I've been working with since 2021. So a couple of years now, and just going at the pace that we need to get it done around everything else that, has been happening in her life. And that's important too. Like sometimes you can't rush these things, and you shouldn't rush them. There is a process. Obviously, like I said, I do a 16-week program because I want people to have the transformation and get the results. But then, like I said, I've got a client that I've been working with for 2 years now, and that's because of her particular life circumstances. So everyone's different, but getting the support is, it makes all the difference.
Yeah. It makes all the difference in life in general. I think support for whatever it is, writing a book,
absolutely,
overcoming your trauma. I had a bad day, my hair is crazy. Like, I think just support, and especially women supporting women, I think is also extremely important. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, and very awesome that you've, come as far as you have, and thank you for sharing your journey.
Oh, thank you. Really appreciate it.
I might just be in touch with you.
Yeah, or more than welcome to reach out. And for anyone else that's listening too, if you want a little freebie, to get people started, is you can jump on my website. If you go to jazrollensen.com, just to the homepage, you'll see the little opt-in box, or else jazrollensen.com/author checklist. You can download my 14-step guide for going from aspiring to published, which is just a helpful guide of like what to actually expect and what you need to do to get from that first idea to a published book. Because a lot of people have no idea where to start or what to do. So that's a little freebie. If anyone wants to download that, you can get that as well.
Well, thank you so much. Since the recording of this episode, Jaz has made a significant career move. She's decided to transition away from her book coaching business and fully commit to her career in public speaking. It's an exciting new chapter for Jaz, and I extend my best wishes to her as she embarks on this journey. I just want to say thank you so much for tuning in to Without Regret, the podcast. I really appreciate it. And I'd like to ask you to please like and subscribe. Leave me a review wherever you get your podcast. That would be really awesome, because that's how my podcast is going to get noticed. So that would be a huge help, or share it on your social media would be awesome as well. Thank you so much. This podcast is a Without Regret production, which is produced by me. Artwork is by me. Everything's by me except for that theme song. That's by a guy named Michael Bergoglio. You can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Without Regret Podcast, and on Instagram at without_regret_podcast. Thanks again.